Allesandro and I are going to do over the next 25 minutes is just talk you through a piece of work that we've been doing in the UK PSF that some of you might be familiar with, which is around building a UK plant sciences roadmap. So some of you will remember back in 2014, the UK PSF published a report which was about the current status and future challenges for UK plant sciences. The report was very well received. It was a very useful piece of work. But out of this came a few recommendations. And these are just a summary of some of those sort of key recommendations that came out of the report. So it highlighted the need for increased investment in plant sciences. It talked about stability of funding is essential in the long term, so moving away from this short-term sort of funding situation. We needed more effective translation of plant science research into applications. That was seen as vital. Education and training must meet the needs of employers. We need to inspire the next generation of plant scientists, and also create better regulatory frameworks where must be more evidence, risk-based, transparent, and enabling innovation. So again, we know of a lot of new technologies that are parked because of the regulatory frameworks that they sit within. So as a result of those key recommendations from the report, 4 working groups were established, and some of the people here today were involved in some of those working groups. And these were the 4 working groups that existed. So one around training and skills, one around translation, one about funding, and a final one around regulation. And actually, one of the key things that came out, I think it was the funding workshop, was a working group, was the idea to develop a roadmap for plant science over the next decade. Or few decades, in fact. And this was one of the key sort of recommendations that was decided to take forward. And by the way, if you want to see these, the reports of these working groups, you can find them at this website listed here below. Now, one of the key things that was seen with the idea of the roadmap was the success, and some of the drive behind it was the success of the strategic roadmap for synthetic biology. So this was published in 2012 and was seen as a real driving force for the whole development of that area, and actually most critically, not only alignment, but also a large chunk of funding that went into the area. And this document, this roadmap, was seen as a really critical thing. So the decision was made to try and use this as a sort of template for how we might do things in plant sciences. So this is just a specific, the specific recommendation that was taken out of the working group. So it talked about developing a 25-year roadmap for UK plant sciences to include the breadth of plant science. So this is right the way through from basic research through to ecology and all sorts of other aspects as well. To focus on those grand challenges, to include things like a risk register and importantly an opportunities register to focus the strategic and that provides focus on the strategic value of plant science, but also to receive input from a broad range of stakeholders, so academia, industry, funding agencies, NGOs, the full works, to also engage with the KTN as an important factor, as a real sort of driver of knowledge transfer in the area. And this is why, with all this, and the final recommendation was about prioritising the roadmap as activity was taken forward. So that's where the background, if you like, to where we are. And now what Allesandro is going to do is take us forward in what we've actually been doing in that area. So starting this year, we've actually started to progress that, and Allesandro can bring you up to date with where we are in that whole process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, my name is Allesandro Allegra. I'm from the Royal Society of Biology. And as Rick said, I've been looking after the roadmap for UK plant sciences. So I will introduce you to what a technology roadmap looks like and how we're going about producing one. Please bear in mind that this is still work in progress. So all the results that I present here are just provisional. And we want to open up the discussion after this with you as members of the plant sciences community to see whether we're heading in the right direction, and we want you to be involved. So we would invite you to come and talk to us and share your ideas and your thoughts with us. So first, what a roadmap is. Roadmap is a strategic tool. It's a tool used usually by industries, by organizations, to plan ahead, and especially to plan the steps to reach a certain point in the future, a certain result. And the methodology used to develop a roadmap brings together stakeholders from a wide variety of fields, from a wide variety of perspectives. So we decided to do a roadmap for UK plant sciences, specifically because of that, because it allows us to gather all different points of view from what is a very broad field. And specifically, we asked people to think about those 5 themes here. So the trends and drivers, so what's happening out there? What are the main drivers outside plant sciences that have an impact on it? So climate change, for example, or the development of certain new technologies. What are the perspectives of specific stakeholders, be it industry, be it founders, be it consumers? What are the main challenges and opportunities that plant sciences can help addressing? What are the science, technology, innovation needs that are needed to achieve those? And what are the enablers? What is needed in terms of like skills, money, regulations? So this way, we provided a structure to think about the future of plant sciences. And the idea is that once we will have this roadmap, we can provide consolidated evidence to support strategic decision-making and funding in the sector of plant sciences. So we organized 2 workshops. We invited around 300 people from a wide variety of sectors. So as you can see, around half of them are academics from all sectors of plant sciences, from agricultural sciences to forestry to plant genetics. But we also had people from the business sector, from the government sector, and from NGOs and other organizations. And eventually the 2 workshops in London and Edinburgh involved around 40 attendees, and some of you are here today, and many more expressed interest in being involved in the process, even if they could not attend in person, so they fed their input into the document. And what happened during the workshop is this. So we started off with big poster on the wall, which we had pre-populated based on input sent in by participants and desk research. So you can see there the 5 colors are the 5 categories that I highlighted earlier, and we started, pre-populating those categories, and then we asked people to actually vote, prioritize, feed their input, and that's what it looks like, if it works. So lots of people here and lots of post-its. As you can see, it's a very colorful exercise, and we did it over multiple times. This is sort of like the main landscape, but we also had several specific zoom-ins. And what we did since was transcribing and elaborating all this information. Of course, this is done on the day, so this data needs to be interpreted. And that's what we're doing right now. So from that, what you can see in the 3rd picture, we got to this, which is still work in progress, but it's more readable than a bunch of post-its. And what this is a landscape of what a roadmap for plant sciences might look like. So you can see we have short-term, medium-term, and long-term. Of course, the farther ahead you go, the harder it gets to actually come up with concrete proposals. And we have populated those categories with specific things. So up there, for example, you can see what are the trends that people involved in workshops have identified as those that have most influence on plant sciences. I appreciate that it might be a bit hard to read, but we have a poster at the poster session tonight in which there is a printout of these. So you're very welcome to come, look at it, discuss it with me and with my colleague Matt, who has been helping with this, and feed your thoughts. As I said, it's still work in progress, but it should give you an idea of what we're trying to achieve. And crucially, we need to fill in some bits here. We need to get a bit more speculative, maybe, look a bit farther ahead in the future. But this gives us some structure. And from these, we've identified 8 key themes. Those came up by sort of like clustering together all of the ideas that were discussed during the workshops. As you can see, they cover quite a variety of things, so food production, novel crops, plant health and crop resilience, technological and scientific advancements on genetics, genomics, phenotyping, but a number of other technologies as well, knowledge management techniques and data technology, so things such as big data, for example, or use of satellite technologies, novel uses of plant materials and biofuels, management of ecosystem and the monitoring of biosecurity, education skills and public perception, and research agenda, and what to do with it research. Now, again, those topics have emerged from the bottom up, from the discussion. Doesn't mean that any of these categories is set in stone. Those are provisional, are sort of like, working categories. And again, we will be very happy to hear from you if you think that something may or is missing, or something is being, miscategorized. And of course, we will go through several iterations of these before we get to the final document. But this is to give you a flavor of the sort of things we're working on. The idea is that for each of those topics, we'll have a zoomed-in mini roadmap. So something that looks a bit like this. This is what came out from one of the breakout groups during one of our workshops focusing on ecosystem management. So what they did was basically replicating the big picture on a very specific topic. So the previous one this one looks at the whole of plant sciences. This one looks at ecosystem management more specifically. So the two of them are complementary in a way, and this sets a vision on the far right side, and all the steps necessary to get there, and the linkages, like what's needed in order to do what. So our aim is to develop one of these stories, in a way, for each of the main themes, so that it can be fully articulated. As I said, it's work in progress, and we still have questions, and critically, this is a roadmap for plant sciences, and we want to discuss it with the community of plant scientists. So we have some questions here that we'd like to discuss with you now, but also please come and talk to us during the poster session or during the breakout, or feel free to drop me an email. Register your interest. We don't have a draft at the moment. We're working on it, but we will be very interested in hearing from you and sending you something later on for you to input in. And maybe, Rick, do you want to add a few words about the sort of like open questions?
Yeah, so I think the key things that as Allesandro said is that we've done the workshops already as a starting point, that we've captured a lot of information. As you can see, there's a lot of data in there that we still need to work through. But the idea is that this isn't closed, this isn't finalized, and what we need, very importantly, is input from the broader community as well. So we want this to be an inclusive process. What we don't want to do is produce a roadmap in a few months' time, and then people say, well, I had no chance to feed into this. So we do want to bring people in. As Allesandro showed, we contacted a lot of people, and although ultimately we ended up with 40 people at the workshops, there were a lot more people who wished they could have been there and wanted to have their input, and some of them did send some things in advance. So this is another opportunity, I suppose, to engage with the plant sciences community about this road mapping exercise. And I guess these were just some of the sort of quick questions that we were thinking about that we could ask now. And to reiterate as well, if you want to see more detail, more granularity about the information, there's the poster outside that encapsulates some of this information already. So please do have a look at it. But I guess the first question here is, what are we thinking about, and what's the vision for how we might use this? What are the sort of scenarios? I mean, one of the things I think that's important for me that we've certainly talked about at the PSF committee is this idea that lots of activities are always going on. There's always lots of reviews, and some of these reviews tend to be quite cross-cutting. So you might get reviews of, say, agri-tech or agri-food. And one of the things that we want to be able to do, and I think Dale alluded to this right at the very beginning, is that make sure that the plant science gets its share of the cake, if plant science gets its representation up front. So if we have a decent roadmap sat in our back pockets, when these things come out, we can get there early and we can say, this is what the plant sciences community within the UK thinks about this. So this is just an example of where we think, a scenario where we can use a roadmap as an effective tool. And we would love to garner opinion from anyone else about any other sort of situations where we think we might be able to use it. So this is a kind of session. Please, we would encourage people to throw things out there if they can. I know it's a bit of a daunting scenario, but we will catch this. Matt's going to take notes, I believe, so we will catch this with prosperity, and we will feed it into the exercise. So does anyone have any starters for 10?
Also, if you have any questions about the process,
Yeah.
I'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah.
If you could please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Lilia Serazididova, I work for Knowledge Transfer Network, part of the agriculture team for plants and crops. I think it's an excellent initiative and we definitely support that. My few suggestions would be to include in this roadmap a lot of key facts which you can present to funders about the value of plant science for economy and, for social enterprise and, for three pillars of the sustainability. It's very important. We've often been asked why we should give you money, what have you delivered for the economy. So key facts would be very important. And also, I think similar exercises carried out by the research councils in developing their programs for research funding going forward. So it's worthwhile engaging with, for example, BBSSE and also regional networks. Like here in the East, we have Agritech East. There would be similar networks which already carried their internal exercise and collected a lot of inputs what the science needs to deliver to the economy. I mainly speak from the view of industry and businesses. And they do have very particular needs, and that's very well known. So KTN itself would be very happy to help and point to the other sources of information. Thank you. It's really a worthwhile exercise.
Thank you. Well, I should say maybe that we did have the research councils represented at the workshops and also Innovate UK, as well as some other sort of like regional groups. So we did one of our workshops in Scotland where we had someone from the Science Advice to Scottish Agriculture Service and sort of like a number of other research users as well as research funders. But we're of course happy to sort of like open the discussion up with as many stakeholders as possible.
I mean, and one of the suggestions that was always also made is that a lot of that sort of data about, what's plant sciences ever done for the UK was included in the report, but we think it's probably time to have a quick, we don't want to go back and revisit all of that, but maybe have a refresh because a lot of things have happened. And I know one very good example of that is Innovate UK, the Sustainable Agriculture and Food Innovation Platform had only just started when the report was collated. So actually I know there's a lot of data about how that innovation funding has trickled down through sectors, so crops and plants, for example.
Hey, so, I'm Geraint Parry. I work for Garnet, which is the BBSSE Plant Science Network. So following on question, actually, so you had people from KTN and BBSSE during the roadmap, but do you have a promise from them that they'll support what's produced ultimately at the end? Because without that, it might have limited repercussions. And secondly, about the roadmap process itself, because I was there for the one in London. It was actually really useful. It was a good process. It was an enjoyable day. But did you learn anything at the end of that day that you didn't know at the start of the day? Because everyone had to do their homework, and we, just to explain, we sent in ideas for that, and then we kind of chatted about it during the day and worked more specifically. At the end of the day, was there things that were more clear at the end of the day than at the start of the day?
So I would say two things in regard to that. One is that I think that the process of this is as valuable as the output, in the sense that many of the people involved are already sort of like mid to senior level decision makers. And if the exercise allows them to see what others think and actually see that what they think it's in line with what others think, it's already a result. So even if what is achieved at the end of the day is not like a breakthrough idea, still the process you've gone through in order to get there has a value in itself. And to answer your first question, of course there cannot be any firm commitment by a government body to fully back something that comes from outside, but I think that in principle we had some really strong interest by all those involved to actually use these the results of these within the organizations. And the fact that those people were actually present at the workshops means that they will have the confidence to actually back whatever is in the roadmap.
I think it's a very good point that I don't think, I mean, if you just look at some of the themes, it's very early stages that are emerging. There's no shocks in there. There's no sort of like earth-shattering moments where we're like, why didn't we ever think of that? But I suppose, and we probably could have got 5 people in the room and come up with a very similar mix. But the important thing, and I think it was Allesandro was reiterating, is the validation from the whole community that this isn't just, well, you know, that a few people said this is why we need it to be inclusive. We need to bring everyone in to make sure that actually what we get is truly representative of what the plant sciences community believes are the ways forward. And I think then that also then feeds onto your first point, is if we have this as a single voice from the UK PSF, then actually it gives more validity with funders like Innovate, for example, than it's just like, my opinion is we ought to spend more money on this.
Celia Knight, the Gatsby Plant Science Summer School. Just to follow on for that, I think it's congratulations for doing that. Obviously slightly disappointing that you had 40 and not more, but that's, and I'm sorry I couldn't make it either, but it's I think the step forward from that is to move quickly on to use what came out of that, to then reiterate out round a few more people to see whether actually they agree with that or not. It's just what you're doing here, obviously. And then maybe there's another iteration of that workshop that's needed. Because when you showed the picture of the post-its, that takes time, and that takes people in the same room together to work through that. And the first iteration, you don't get it right in the first time, obviously. So, my suggestion is to move rather swiftly on to a minor reiteration of that and see what communication, see whether you're taking more people with you. And that, as you said, Rick, that will, if it's the sensible decisions, the things that are coming out there, those surely are the things that will get funding. I don't think there will be great surprises there.
Thank you. And I think the intention is that I mean, the data, there's a huge amount of data, and it's taken slightly longer to go through than we expected, and it was probably slightly, what was your expression, dirtier than we expected or something. Yeah, so there's a lot of work there, but I think it is key, and I think one of the key points now is like meetings like this is to make people aware that this is going on. So for all those people who weren't aware before, and hopefully they are, and we can spread it out so then people engage, and I think we probably do need a follow-up event.
Please send me an email if you're interested, because like when I send this out, when I send invites out, the longer the mailing list I have, the more chances I have to populate the workshop. So if you're interested, please do get in touch. If I've not already harassed you a lot with emails, some of you have received plenty.
Hi, I'm Stephen Spool, and for purposes of the discussion, I'll represent Garnet as well. One of the things I think in Garnet that we felt quite strongly about is that there needs to be some sort of clause or a clear theme maybe within a roadmap to show some kind of commitment to blue skies fundamental plant science research. Because that's something I think that's very often overlooked. And we feel in Garnet that perhaps that's a theme that's easily overlooked as well in a roadmap like this. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, if we go back to these, in a way, a lot of the green belt, the science, technology, and innovation needs, is blue sky research in the sense that the applications are up here, but what sort of like science you need before you can get there, it's represented here. So say if we need to say fix nitrogen, like have crops that can fix nitrogen. Well, here we will have something like all the things we need to understand, which can be very blue sky research before we can even think of how to do that. So it might not be represented as one of the themes, but I think it underpins most of the themes. But when we'll go sort of like in the drafting process, I think it will be very good to get that sort of input. If you see that this is being either like, framed incorrectly or could be, be brought forward a little bit more, I cannot see why not.
Yeah, I definitely didn't get the sense that there was any kind of, and I think people, I guess where some of these thinking is coming from, that we often talk about the valley of death, but everyone's worried about what you're going to do is move the funding into the valley, and then you create a hole somewhere else. So you're just moving the same pot about. I would hope that actually what we can do from this is ensure that we get a better balance of funding, for example, across plant sciences as opposed to other areas. But I think that is also important to make sure that we're not just saying it's not just, you know, we know if we talk about agri-food, it's not just about crops, it's about livestock, it's about a whole range of things. And we've got to make sure that we get our, you know, our fair voice within that. Again, as Dale said very early on, I think plant sciences can be sometimes overlooked. I certainly know from my career in plant health, I always used to look enviously over the fence towards animal health, whose budgets were often 3 times, 4 times bigger than ours. So.
Also, I will say, as much as the linear model of innovation is flawed, having something such as a roadmap that shows you the steps that you need in order to get somewhere allows people to think about everything you need. So it's not just a matter of applying a certain technology, but actually there is a whole number of steps you need to get through before you can get there. So I think it helps visualizing that in a way.
Sure. So I think the main point I think that we want to make probably is that I think this is very clear within our community. But once such a document gets presented to policymakers, that's something that easily falls off the table, I think. So, yeah. My second point was just a question of how will the roadmap set itself apart from a previous document from what David Balcom chaired. I don't know if he's still here. The Reaping Benefits document from the Royal Society, in which they didn't really set out a roadmap, but I just wonder how's it going to differ?
So I think actually, you know, David's report and a lot of other reports, so they set the scene, and I think they definitely had a very important role because they got things like food security on the political agenda. You know, it wasn't really, you know, up until a lot of those points, and, you know, things happened in 2007, 2008. Until that point, you know, we were just under the impression that food was something we imported. You know, so everything was sorted. And there was genuine, you know, thoughts in a lot of the sort of political echelons. So actually, the important thing there is that, you know, those reports got us to a point where they raised the issue, they set the scene, but I think the roadmap is definitely about how we can progress that. So it's about how we address some of those grand challenges, not just saying, you know, there is the perfect storm. You know, it's beyond the perfect storm.
This is intended to be like a strategic tool, so a bit more specific in terms of like, not only what the vision is, but also what specific steps you need in order to get there. But of course, like, those are complementary, and we've been relying a lot on those previous documents as well as existing strategies from the government, for example, in order to sort of like place our roadmap in the wider context.
Thanks.
Okay.
Up there,
But there's, well, oh, okay.
I like the process because a roadmap forces us to define what it is that we believe plant science can do that will turn people's heads, particularly policymakers, and because it's all, in the end, all about money, it makes us define what we believe is not only stunning scientifically, but which is important for society. The roadmap forces us to do that, and it's essential to grab the minds of funders. Just by way of example, probably most of us heard Giles Allroyd talk about this morning, and he talked about 4 steps, each of them big steps that need to happen before you could get nitrogen fixation in cereals. He was claiming more or less success for number 1 out of number 4. Now, just using that as an example, because we all heard it, I don't think that Gates Foundation or anybody would be particularly excited about pouring money into a proposal that was just number 1. He told us at the beginning of the talk what the end goal was that was way beyond reach, but that's what was funded. And he said, Gates will be patient, they're willing to take the risk because the prize is so big. So what I believe is important about this is that the prizes that are claimed are the big ones that will turn people's heads and will be so compelling of what plant science can do that the funding will follow. But it won't follow if we just talk to Giles to discover whether cereals have some signal chain function that's left over from evolution. I don't believe people will fund that. So we've got to be clear, as in his Gates example, nitrogen fixation in cereals. So this is why I think the roadmap is important. We, the plant science community, have to claim what we can do, what we will do given the funds, and it's a very different process from the next experiment that we're excited about in our own research career.
No, I think that's a really, really good point, and I think that it is. It's that kind of stuff that, you know, it's a vision as well. So there's got to be a vision of where plant sciences can be in the future. So I think that's really important. No.
Harriet Truscott from the Gatsby Plant Science Education Programme. I'd like to agree with what Richard has just said. I've seen that in my work focusing on education and inspiring the next generation of plant scientists, we've found that what works is setting out a grand vision. Young people are inspired by something which has a real purpose, something which has a grand vision of the sort that Giles was talking to us about this morning. It can be tempting when we're asking government and funding bodies for more money to take a very negative stance, to say, well, we're doing so badly, we have so few people. I don't think that that is going to inspire anybody, and that's what we need to do.
Yeah, that is a very good point, and I think what we don't want to do is this cannot be seen as more bleeding heart researchers complaining they haven't got enough money. We've got to, because that would just go nowhere. So we need to make sure that it is, and this is why the vision's important. This is what we're going to do to change the world, not give us some more money and we'll have a go at something. There was a gentleman at the top there, I think, who patiently had his hand up.
Then I think after this, start the next session.
Yeah.
Hi there. I'm Ian Johnston from Birmingham, and I'm a newcomer to the field, so apologies if this is extremely naive or anything. So this is a UK initiative, and it seems to me that plant science can contribute an awful lot to UK society. But as we've seen throughout today, the plant science that's going on in the UK can also contribute a lot in disparate ways to the international community, helping crops that are more important in the developing world than over here. So in your themes and the deliverables that you see emerging from them, is there a role for disambiguating what would be more useful for the UK and what would be more useful internationally? Because I'm sure some of the stakeholders will be more interested than others in keeping things internal or spreading to charities throughout the world.
I think we're covering both, definitely. I mean, if we look at the aims we set for ourselves or the roadmap, we want these to show that plant sciences can help stimulate the UK economy, but also help the UK deliver, among other things, on its international obligations. So there was actually a lot of discussion about the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, and how plant science can contribute to those. I think the name Plant Science for the, Roadmap for UK Plant Sciences comes mostly from the fact that we are the UK Plant Science Federation, which doesn't mean that we're only going to look at things happening in the UK, but we're going to look at things from the UK perspective, because that's where we're based and those are the people we talk to, which doesn't mean that we're not going to look at how plant sciences can contribute to solve challenges which are either worldwide or specific to other nations. Also because both science and the challenges we're trying to address, they don't know any political boundaries. So it's just like the point of view we're taking, but it's not limiting.
It's a very good point, and maybe the strapline needs to be what UK plant sciences can do to address global challenges. So Yeah, no, it's a very good point that how we tease out that international. We're being all very navel-gazing as a UK community, but actually these are global challenges, so it's a very good point.
It's also partially that challenge that the target we're trying to hit is mostly policymakers at the national level. So we have to frame it that way because that's the best way to actually be listened to. Doesn't mean that that's the only way to do it. It's probably the most practical given our sort of like, our standing.
We probably one quick one. I'm conscious that we're eating into the final session.
Hi, I'm Anne-Marie, and I just want to give you a little background of myself. I started with a bachelor's in biological sciences, but then moved over to climate science. And this is an intersection between plant science and a different discipline. And this is where I will and want to and will end up. But what I thought would be an input for you is to identify all the interactions between different, or the interactions between different disciplines where you can achieve more innovation and probably get some more funding.
So that's one of the things we've been looking at. So for example, traditionally, BBSRC is the research council funding most of plant sciences, but there's increasing interest from other research councils, such as MRC, for example, and charities such as the Wellcome Trust, which have traditionally funded biomedical research, into sort of like broadening up. So if you take the example of the Wellcome Trust, they're now looking much more broadly at health rather than biomedical research. So there is no reason why we could not broaden out our work and look, as you said, at like funders across disciplines or specifically for interdisciplinary work.
So again, like the previous comment about, this is UK, but in an international context, this is plant science in an interdisciplinary context. So again, maybe there's another strapline there. What plant science can do in an interdisciplinary world. But thank you. Yeah.
Interdisciplinarity is definitely one of the themes that sort of like cuts across most of the discussion we had during the workshops. No one thinks that any specific discipline alone can solve any of those challenges.
Okay. Yeah, just no.
I'd love to flog that one to not to death, but to let it live in every possible form, because when you look back in the last 40 years of plant science and nominate what have been the tremendous breakthroughs that have transformed plant science, very few of the breakthroughs were from plant science itself. They've come from the whole genomics world, which came from, as we all know, bacterial genetics, human genetics, phage genetics, and so on. And I expect it to be like that in the future. The big breakthroughs for plant science will not come from plant science. They will come from assimilation of the breakthroughs in other areas, computing and so on. So I think it's very important for us to get into that frame of mind, that we're making a pitch through plants, but we're not talking about what the innovations in plant science will do. It's what the innovations across the whole field of science and engineering and computing will achieve through the orifices of plants.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're probably going to wrap it.
Well, but yeah, come and talk to us and come and see our poster. We're going to be upstairs and get in touch. Thank you.